On today's episode, the Chicago Blackhawks significantly hurt their chances at landing Connor Bedard with a 5-2 win over the Penguins last night. I'll go over the miracle the Hawks need in order to finish 32nd in the standings and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Wednesday, April 12th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you can also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, whether you're a consistent listener of the show or even a first-time listener, please help me out by going and showing some support here real quick. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's 100% for free and really does help me out tremendously. While you're there, make sure to smash that like button, go and comment down below, and turn on those push notifications as well to get notified when the episode gets uploaded to YouTube every day. For you audio folks, you can also follow along for 100% free wherever you get your podcast. You can also go and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Greatly appreciate all the support. And I got to remind you all that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Make sure to go and download America's #1 sportsbook, which is safe, secure, and super easy to use. All right, enough of that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. We have tons of stuff on tap here for today's show. So much, in fact, that I'm actually going to be dropping 2 episodes today. Another one either later this afternoon here on Wednesday or maybe early on Thursday morning, just kind of depending on what news, if any, is going to come out regarding the Chicago Blackhawks here later today. But the second episode that I'll be dropping today is going to touch on some of the roster moves and the signings that we've seen the Blackhawks make here as of late, including a one-year extension, I should say, to defenseman Jared the Bouncer Tenorti. He will officially be back for the 2023-2024 campaign. We got some great news on Hawks 2020 second-round pick Drew Commesso. We heard about Jalen Lipin, who was a 7th-round pick in 2021 that's kind of quietly creeping up the prospect rankings a little bit. So lots of good stuff to talk about on that episode that's going to be dropping later today. Make sure to keep an eye out for that one. But for today's episode, we got to start by talking about what's gone down with the Chicago Blackhawks in their last 2 days of game action. And I apologize for not getting an episode out yesterday on Tuesday. Just a quick turnaround following an 8 o'clock game against the Minnesota Wild. I had to get up really early for work. It was a pretty long and important day for me and the other job. So I apologize for not getting an episode out yesterday. But what we missed was the Chicago Blackhawks pulling off a perfect tank loss to the Minnesota Wild in their second to last game at the United Center this season. The Blackhawks did give up the opening goal of the game to Matt Boldy, but responded really well the rest of the way in the first period. And in the second, it was honestly one of their most dominant periods of the entire season. At one point, the Blackhawks were up like 16-1 in shots on goal in the middle frame alone. I mean, I don't recall seeing numbers like that at any point throughout the course of the season. Those opening 40 minutes seriously was some of the best hockey I've seen the Blackhawks play, not only in quite a while, but all season long. And that's pretty gosh darn impressive considering the lineup that they're rostering at the moment. We got goals from Joey Anderson. That third line of 14, 16, 15 stayed red hot as Anderson cleaned up the loose change in front. And then Anders Bjork actually wound up potting his first goal as a member of the Blackhawks to put them ahead 2-1 going on into the third period. Had all of us Blackhawks fans a little nervous that they were going to pull off the victory, but what ends up happening, the Wild go on to strike for 2 goals in the final 6 minutes. They add the empty netter, Marcus Johansson, with 2 of them for Minnesota, and the Wild end up winning this game 4-2, which left no Blackhawks fans mad because they got to see some really good hockey out of their team in the opening 40 minutes, and they got the result they wanted, which was a regulation loss. And we've seen some performances like that, pretty frequently from the Blackhawks in the last month or two. Off the top of my head, the game against the Tampa Bay Lightning where they blew it late. I knew there was another game in that stretch as well where they executed just a perfect tank loss. And that's basically what this was on Monday night against the Minnesota Wild, even though Minnesota rostered basically none of their lineup that they're going to be rolling with in the postseason. They still find a way to beat these lowly Chicago Blackhawks 4-2. And then following that game on Monday night at the United Center, the Chicago Blackhawks had a real quick turnaround. They had to travel all the way out to Pittsburgh for the back end of a back-to-back against the Penguins. And for the Penguins, this was an absolutely crucial game for them because, for those who may not know, coming into last night, they trailed the New York Islanders by just 1 point and the Florida Panthers by 2 points for the final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. And they only had 2 games left in the regular season as well. And for them to have this game on home ice, being a must-win scenario, going up against a Blackhawks roster that is less than ideal at the moment on the back end of a back-to-back where they had to travel from Chicago to Pittsburgh. They lose an hour in the process, apparently arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning. Feels like everything was in the advantage for the Penguins, and what winds up happening? An absolute nightmare situation for both teams, folks, as the Chicago Blackhawks win the freaking game 5-2. Just a painful victory for the Blackhawks at PPG Paints Arena out in Pittsburgh. And for the Penguins, if you thought I was mad at the Calgary Flames last week, holy cow, Pittsburgh, what? Completely unacceptable to lose this game. You do not deserve to be in the playoffs if you're losing to this Chicago Blackhawks team in the scenario that I just described. You have Evgeny Malkin, you have Sidney Crosby, and this is what you're going to do in what could be your last run together? Feels like, if the Penguins do end up missing the playoffs now, they're still only 1 point back of the New York Islanders, while the Florida Panthers have officially clinched their playoff spot. By the way, you're welcome, Armando Velez from Locked On Panthers. You're welcome, Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. You're welcome. I'm not happy about it, but I guess there is a little happiness in me that we did those two teams, both friends of the show, a little bit of a favor there, but just completely unacceptable for Pittsburgh. This is really how your run's going to end. I mean, there undoubtedly has to be moves made by that front office. If Ron Hex, it's just such a nightmare there in Pittsburgh right now that there undoubtedly has to be changes moving forward. And for this to kind of be the last straw, frustrating, trust me, for both fan bases. And to me too, not only did the Penguins lose this game, but yeah, sure, they outchanced the Chicago Blackhawks. What did you do? They outshot the Chicago Blackhawks by a pretty decent margin, but I really wasn't impressed with their team game. Like, it kind of just felt like it was the Sidney Crosby show. And Peter Mrazek I'll tell you what, Sidney Crosby is seeing Peter Mrazek in his nightmares tonight, and so are Blackhawks fans are seeing Peter Mrazek. Oh my God, absolutely standing on his head to essentially, he was the real difference maker that gave the Blackhawks this victory. But other than his, he had 4, 5, 6 A+ saves on Sidney Crosby alone, I wasn't really all that impressed with the Penguins' effort here in a must-win desperation situation. I didn't really see it out of them, particularly late in that third period when they had their backs against the wall. They didn't even get one past Mrazek until Evgeny Malkin scored on the power play early on in the third period. But the Blackhawks, after that, wound up grabbing the lead right back as Buddy Robinson picked a hell of a time to score his first goal with a member of the Blackhawks. Athanasiou would go on to add an insurance goal, but the Penguins had power play opportunities late in this game where they had to show some desperation. They could pull their goaltender and get a 6-on-4 man advantage, but they just couldn't do anything with the puck in the offensive zone. Bad passing, no real high danger chances, no desperation in those dwindling moments. And it was pretty sad to see for a team that really needed to win this game. And for us Blackhawks fans, it was pretty sad to see because we needed to lose this game. And of course, that didn't end up happening. The Blackhawks pick up the most unnecessary victory of the entire season, defeating the Pittsburgh Penguins 5-2 out in Pittsburgh. But before I talk about more of the negative side of this win over the Pens. I do want to kind of spin this in a positive direction for a quick second, because Blackhawks fans, in the last week, we've now seen this team take down two teams, both coming on the road, by the way, in a situation where their opponent really needed to win to keep their playoff chances alive. And Luke Richardson has done a phenomenal job of finding a way to get the absolute most out of this roster and continuing to have this team, while they're obviously at a skill disadvantage, they're not at a work ethic disadvantage. They're working harder than ever. And that's honestly like why the third line of Tkachuk, Kara, and Anderson has been getting rewarded. Do you think it's the skill game that's really making the difference for them right now? No, it's what they're doing in the offensive zone by grinding it out, being a pain in the ass to play against, physical, winning hard battles, winning loose puck battles, and going to the dirty areas and scoring goals. Sure, Boris Tkachuk has randomly scored some beauties here over the last couple of weeks, but a lot of their success is coming from the hard work. And we're seeing the Blackhawks, outworking the Calgary Flames, outworking the Pittsburgh Penguins, two teams that, really needed must-win games, basically, for both of those teams against essentially an AHL roster. And Luke Richardson is finding ways to win with this AHL roster. And while it's frustrating, yes, that the Blackhawks are winning meaningless games, it's still undoubtedly impressive that Luke Richardson and the Chicago Blackhawks are finding ways to win right now. And I mentioned, too, a perfectly executed tank win against the Minnesota Wild. We've seen that a handful of times over the last month, where the Blackhawks were in it until, the last few minutes, and they just found ways to lose. They've been in a lot of games here post-trade deadline when their roster hasn't been the best. I mean, a couple weeks ago, this Blackhawks team beat the Boston Bruins, who just set an NHL record for the most points in a season, the best regular season of all time. The Chicago Blackhawks beat them 3 weeks ago. In regulation, one of only 12 or 13 teams, one of 12 or only 13 times the Bruins have lost in regulation this season, the Chicago Blackhawks were one of those teams. So yes, while it's absolutely frustrating that this team is winning games that we want them to be losing, it is still impressive what Luke Richardson is able to do right now with this less than ideal roster. And it certainly has me excited about what this Chicago Blackhawks team can do when the front office actually wants to be winning and gives Luke Richardson some adequate pieces to work with moving forward. All right, coming up in just a minute, Blackhawks fans, I will get into the updated Tankathon standings following the Hawks' frustrating 5-2 win over the Pittsburgh Penguins last night. But first, I need to talk to you all about FanDuel. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back, baby, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. And that's because if you're a new customer, you can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet loses. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, place your first bet, and you'll get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your bet doesn't win. And for all my Cubs fans out there, tonight I got the Cubs money line. What a game for the Cubbies last night. I had the over. Perfect game to have the over. The Cubs erase a 7-run deficit. If you want to bet on the Cubs like I've been lately, don't miss out on your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, segment 2. Let's get into what the updated Tankathon standings look like following the Chicago Blackhawks' frustrating, hair-ripping 5-2 win over the Pittsburgh Penguins, as they're now down to their final game of the season. And unfortunately, folks, with that win last night, yes, the Blackhawks have leaped both the Anaheim Ducks and the Columbus Blue Jackets in the standings. Here's how it all shakes out at the moment. The Blue Jackets still sit in last place. They're 24, 47, and 9 with 57 points. They got 2 games left in the season now, coming on Thursday and Friday, a home-and-home against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then on Friday against the Buffalo Sabres. They're the only team left in the race with 2 games left on their schedule. They just picked up a 4-3 overtime loss to the Philadelphia Flyers last night, by the way, which that game wrapped up before the Blackhawks and Penguins score went final. So when the Blue Jackets picked up that point. The Blackhawks actually, for a moment, were solely in last place in the NHL standings until, of course, they went on to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. So Columbus still holds the cards. They hold all the chips. They control their own destiny at this point, because if they lose both those games to the Penguins on Thursday and the Sabres on Friday, they'll finish 32nd in the NHL standings. The Anaheim Ducks, along with our Chicago Blackhawks, of course, are hoping that isn't the case. The Ducks are now in second to last place after the Hawks' victory last night. They have 58 points with one game to go. They have the same amount of points and same amount of games remaining as the Blackhawks, but unfortunately, the Ducks do hold the tiebreaker due to having fewer regulation and overtime victories. They lost 3-2 to the Vancouver Canucks last night. Would have been massive if they were able to pick up the victory. They could not. They finish up the regular season on Thursday night against the Los Angeles Kings. And by the way, the Chicago Blackhawks, I didn't mention this in the first segment, but while the Blackhawks have beaten the Calgary Flames and the Pittsburgh Penguins in the last week, they have still lost 11 of their last 13 games, folks. And some of you may remember a couple of weeks ago, it was a Mailbag Monday question that I received where I forget who it was exactly who asked, how many games do the Blackhawks need to lose out of their final 15 in order to have a chance? And I said, if the Blackhawks go on to lose 12 of their final 15 games, I think they'll be right there in the hunt for finishing 32nd in the NHL standings. Well, they've lost 11 of their last 13. They've been doing their part. And for all the people out there saying, oh, the Blackhawks ruined their tank chances last night, they've lost 11 of 13 games. That's basically all you can ask for them at this point. I get it's frustrating to beat the Penguins, but losing 11 of 13 is pretty ideal down the stretch of the season when you're in hunt for the number one overall pick. The problem is Columbus has also lost 11 of their last 16, and the Ducks have lost 12 games in a row, man. Come on, Anaheim. They've lost a couple of those in overtime, but still haven't picked up a victory here since like middle of March. Man, the Blackhawks have been doing a good job of tanking. Just Columbus has been doing just as good of a job, and Anaheim's been doing it better than everyone to find themselves back into the mix. So you can be frustrated with the Blackhawks all you want. I don't really think it makes sense because they've been doing their part. Losing 11 of 13 is properly tanking. Just a couple of other teams have been doing it just as well, if not better. So keep that in mind, Blackhawks fans. That's one thing I also wanted to mention. I know there are a lot of people taken to the internet and giving these knee-jerk reactions of screaming at the team, getting mad at Peter Mrazek, at Buddy Robinson. It's kind of funny. Buddy Robinson, Potts' first NHL goal, first goal with the Blackhawks, and he becomes enemy number one. And same with Peter Mrazek. He has, arguably the best performance of his entire season, and Blackhawks fans are pissed at him about it. It's kind of the weirdness that is the end of the season when you're involved in the tank. And I really do hope the Chicago Blackhawks aren't involved in this for so much longer because it's incredibly frustrating. But the team that we all should be mad at, folks, is not the Chicago Blackhawks. It's the Pittsburgh Penguins. Absolutely inexplicable to lose to this Blackhawks roster on home ice, back against the wall when it's maybe the last time you're going to be playing with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin together. That's how you're going to go out. Of course, they still can make the playoffs if they win their final game, and they're playing the Blue Jackets, funny enough, and the Islanders wind up losing. But if they end up missing the playoffs, this is certainly one game they're going to look back at and leaving their heads with a shake. So don't be mad at the Blackhawks here. Be mad at the Pittsburgh Penguins because they're the real losers of the bunch here. Losing to this Blackhawks team, completely unacceptable on home ice in that scenario. All right, before I wrap up today's show, folks, I do want to be sure to provide you all with a quick little update on the Rockford IceHogs and their push for the Calder Cup Playoffs, as they're down to their final 3 games of the AHL regular season now. And last night, they actually had a massive matchup with the Chicago Wolves, who were just 1 point back of them for the final playoff spot in the Central Division. And I feel like I kind of put a little bit of a jinx on the Rockford IceHogs because when I did my IceHogs update nearly 2 weeks ago now, they were still 6 point clear of the Chicago Wolves with, I think, 7 games left in the season at that point. And I said, it's looking pretty good for the IceHogs. They're going to have to completely melt down the stretch here in order to miss out on the postseason. And then, they kind of went on a little bit of a skid there. The Wolves were finding ways to win some games. It had me a little bit nervous But fortunately, the IceHogs were able to pick up a massive 6-3 win over the Chicago Wolves last night. They got some help from Lucas Reichel and Alex Vlasic, who were both recently reassigned to Rockford to help them with their postseason run. What a game from Luke Philp, I should say. 3 goals, a hat trick for Luke Philp to carry the way offensively. Michael Tepley also went on to add 3 points himself. I love seeing my boy Michael Tepley racking up points. And yeah, a really big win for the Rockford IceHogs to kind of give them a little bit of breathing room and some comfort with just 3 games left in the season. Here's how the Central Division standings are currently shaking out in the AHL following that win last night. So, as I mentioned in that IceHogs update episode, they really can only finish 4th, 5th, or 6th in the Central Division. They're currently in 5th place in the final playoff spot. They are 1 point back of the Iowa Wild for 4th place. Iowa has 76 points with 3 games left to go in the season. The IceHogs are in 5th place with 75 points with 3 games to go. And then the Chicago Wolves, who were 1 point behind them coming into last night's game, they're now 3 points back. They have 72 points, also having 3 games left in the season. So a very, very crucial victory for the IceHogs to help their playoff chances. Looking at who they have in their final 3 games of the season here, they take on, their next game will be against the Grand Rapids Griffins, the minor league club for the Detroit Red Wings. Unfortunately, Grand Rapids is not only last in the Central Division, but they're also the 3rd worst team in the entire AHL. So hopefully Lucas Reichel, Alex Vlasic, Arvid Soderblom, and company can lead the charge and pick up a really big win over Grand Rapids in their next game. That would go a long way because the IceHogs' final 2 games of the regular season come against the Manitoba Moose and the Milwaukee Admirals, both of which are in the top 3 in the Central Division. And speaking of the top 3, we might as well take a look at that because if the IceHogs do end up qualifying for the Calder Cup Playoffs, they'll be playing in a best-of-3 play-in series in the first round against likely the Iowa Wild, with the winner of that best-of-3 play-in series going on to face the top team in the Central Division at the conclusion of the regular season. And at this point in time, the Texas Stars, who the IceHogs defeated in their best-of-3 play-in series last year, they're currently sitting first place in the Central Division with 88 points. They also have 3 games to go. The Milwaukee Admirals are currently the team in second place, though, just 2 points back of the Stars with 86 points. They also have 3 games left on the schedule. So if the IceHogs are able to lock up that playoff spot and beat the Iowa Wild in their best-of-3 play-in series, they'd likely be taking on either the Texas Stars or the Milwaukee Admirals. And your boy did some digging late last night to see how the IceHogs have fared against both of those teams so far here in the season. It looks like the IceHogs would rather be playing Texas if they do wind up advancing to that point in the postseason, because they went 5-2-1 in 8 games against Texas this year, whereas against Milwaukee, they went 3-4-0-2 in 9 games against the Admirals. So sure looks like the Texas Stars would be the more favorable matchup for the IceHogs, but they do have to still take care of business here in their final 3 games. It starts in their next matchup against Grand Rapids, and then hopefully they can wind up clinching a playoff spot in one of those 2 games against Milwaukee or Manitoba. All right, I think that is going to wrap up Wednesday, April 12th episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and make sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you get your podcast, and to go and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it comes out each and every day. Once again, thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. Now for your second listen, make sure to go and check out NHL Game to Game NHL Western Conference. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NHL's Western Conference with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Available on Odyssey, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to check out Game to Game NHL Western Conference. All right, so until tomorrow's episode, that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.